You know that feeling, that gap between who you really are on the inside and the face you show the world? It's a tension, right? We all feel it. Well, today we're going to dive into one author's really interesting framework for making sense of this very modern conflict.
So where are we getting this from? The source for this whole explainer is a book called The Semblance of Woman in Islam, Between the Self and the Image. It's by the late Moroccan scholar Farid al-Ansari. And really, this whole work is his attempt to answer a very, very personal question.
And that question is something I think every single one of us can relate to. Who are you really? Are you the person you know you are deep down, or are you the image you project out into the world? And here's the kicker. Which one actually has more power over your life?
Well, al-Ansari's book just jumps right in and tackles this head-on. He basically says that if you want to understand the identity of the modern Muslim woman, you have to start by understanding this one single fundamental conflict that, in his view, shapes her entire experience. So what is this conflict? It all comes down to two key ideas, the self versus the image. Seriously, this one distinction is the engine that drives his entire argument. Okay, so on one side, you've got al-nafs, which basically translates to the self. And for the author, this is everything. It's the absolute core of a woman's identity, her spirit, her essence, her authentic being that's connected to something greater.
And then on the other side, you have al-sura, which means the image. This is all the external stuff. We're talking about the physical body, the clothes she wears, how she presents herself, and maybe most importantly, how society sees and judges that whole presentation.
So here's the crucial point. This isn't just a simple difference, it's an ongoing struggle. You've got the inner, spiritual, timeless self on one hand, and on the other, the outer, physical, and very modern image. The author's central idea, his whole thesis, is that for today's woman, these two things are basically at war with each other.
Okay, so let's break this down. First, let's look at what the author sees as the ideal. And for him, it's all about nurturing and cultivating that authentic inner self, that al-nafs. And you can actually see how central this is just by looking at the book's structure. If you check out the table of contents, you'll notice the entire first major section is dedicated to what he calls the woman and the semblance of the self. This is the foundation he builds his entire case on.
So what does this ideal self even look like in his view? Well, the chapter titles pretty much tell the whole story. He defines it through what he calls the beauties: the beauty of femininity, the beauty of modesty, of concealment, and of motherhood. For him, these are the core virtues, the building blocks of a woman's authentic identity.
All right, so now let's flip to the other side of this conflict. After laying out his vision for the ideal self, the author launches into this really sharp critique of what he calls the corrupted modern image.
See, in the author's view, this external image, this al-sura, it's not just a neutral reflection of who a woman is. Not at all. He sees it as a battleground. It's a territory that is being actively attacked and twisted by all these outside forces. And he's very specific about who he thinks the culprits are. Again, if we look at the book's structure, he dedicates entire chapters to what he calls the civilizational image, the commercial media image, and the political image. And he argues that each one of these imposes a completely false and damaging idea of what it means to be a woman. Now, we need to be really clear about the author's viewpoint here, because he frames this in incredibly stark terms. He literally describes this pressure on the modern image as part of a civilizational war waged by global Jewry and Zionist Christianity to destroy Islam. I'm quoting directly here because this is his specific framing of the conflict.
Okay, so you've got this intense conflict he's laid out, right? A pure inner self on one side and a corrupted outer image on the other. The obvious question is, what's the solution? What's his proposed resolution?
His answer is Islamic dress, or hijab. But, and this is a big but, he presents it as so much more than just a piece of clothing. For him, it's the primary tool. It's almost like a piece of technology for managing that difficult relationship between the self and the image.
And his logic is actually pretty straightforward when you break it down. It goes like this. Step 1. The external image is under constant attack from a hostile modern culture. Step 2. The authentic inner self is precious, and it needs to be protected from all that noise. So, step 3, therefore, Islamic dress acts as a kind of shield. It guards the self by taking control of the image.
So, let's zoom out for a second. What's the big takeaway here? When you step back from the specifics of his theological argument, you're left with a framework that actually touches on a surprisingly universal dilemma.
So the core takeaway from this book is this very clear, though for some very controversial framework. It's built on this idea of a fundamental conflict, the authentic inner self, which has to be nurtured, versus the modern outer image, which is always under attack and needs to be defended.
And that really leaves us with one final thought, doesn't it? Because regardless of your culture or your beliefs, that core tension he's talking about, it's something a lot of people feel. So it's worth asking yourself, in your own life, just how much power does our external image really hold over our inner self?